Lorgar never wanted power. He never wanted conquest. He never wanted war. What he wanted was truth, and that desire would destroy everything. The Imperium, his legion, his brothers, even himself. Because the most dangerous men are not those who seek power. They are the ones who believe they are right. His name was Lorgar Aurelian, the most faithful of the Primarchs, the most devoted, the most loyal, and ultimately, the first to fall. Among the Emperor's 20 sons, Lorgar was different. He was not known for military genius like Horus, not for savagery like Angram, not for discipline like Guilliman. Lorgar was a philosopher, a writer, a seeker, a man obsessed with one question: why does humanity exist? While his brothers conquered worlds, Lorgar searched for meaning. While they built empires, he built faith. And he believed he had already found the answer: the Emperor. To Lorgar, his father was more than a ruler, more than a warlord, more than the master of mankind. He was divine, a god walking among mortals. The word-bearers carried that belief across the galaxy. On every world they conquered, they raised temples, they wrote scriptures, they built monuments. Entire civilizations were reshaped around the worship of the Emperor. And nowhere was that devotion greater than on a world called Kor. There stood Monarchia, the perfect city. A city of white marble, golden towers, and endless cathedrals. A monument to faith itself. More than 6 billion people lived there. Every street, every plaza, every temple, built in honor of the Emperor. To its people, Monarchia was proof that humanity had finally found its purpose. To Lorgar, it was his greatest achievement, the crown jewel of everything he believed. And soon, it would be reduced to ash. The end began without warning. One night, the skies above Monarchia filled with fire. At first, people thought they were seeing falling stars. Then the stars grew larger. Warships, hundreds of them, descending through the clouds. Among those watching was a young woman named Cyrene Valantion. She stood among the crowds as the vessels approached, and for the first time in her life, she felt afraid, because those ships did not belong to enemies. They belonged to the Imperium. Soon, the truth became impossible to ignore. Blue-armored space marines marched through the city. The Ultramarines, the sons of Robute Guilliman, the 13th Legion. They moved with absolute purpose. No celebrations, no explanations, no mercy. Then the order came. The Emperor himself had spoken. Monarchia was to be evacuated. Every citizen, every district, every temple. 6 days, that was all they had. 6 days to abandon everything they had built. Nobody understood. The people of Monarchia had never rebelled. They had never resisted imperial rule. They had worshipped the Emperor with absolute devotion. Why would he punish them? Questions became panic. Panic became resistance. And resistance was crushed. The Ultramarines enforced the decree without hesitation. Crowds were dispersed, protests were broken. Those who refused to leave were shot. The city that had once echoed with prayers now echoed with screams. Day by day, Monarchia emptied. Families abandoned their homes. Priests abandoned their temples. Entire districts became silent. Still, nobody understood why. Then came the seventh day, and with it, the Emperor's judgment. The seventh day arrived beneath a silent sky. Monarchia stood empty. 6 billion people had been driven from their homes. Its streets were deserted, its temples abandoned, its towers untouched. For a brief moment, the city looked peaceful. Then the heavens opened. A light appeared high above the world, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything human eyes were meant to witness. Across the plains surrounding Monarchia, millions watched. Some prayed, some wept, some simply stared. Then the light descended. Orbital lances. The judgment of the Imperium. The first strikes hit the city center. Entire districts vanished instantly. Marble towers became clouds of dust. Golden cathedrals evaporated in white fire. Shockwaves rolled across the landscape. The ground itself trembled. Monarchia was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Among the refugees stood Cyrene Valancion. She watched the city burn, watched the impossible brightness consume everything she had ever known. Then the light became too much. Pain exploded behind her eyes. The last thing she ever saw was Monarchia disappearing beneath a wall of fire. When darkness finally came, it never left. Cyrene was blind. Around her, people screamed. Entire families collapsed to their knees. Some begged the Emperor for mercy. Others cursed his name. Most simply stood in silence, trying to understand why. By sunset, Monarchia no longer existed. The greatest city ever built by the word-bearers had become a wasteland of ash and glass, a dead scar upon the surface of Kor. But for the people who had survived, the destruction of the city was only the beginning. Because word of Monarchia's fate spread quickly, and eventually it reached the one man responsible for its creation, Lorgar Aurelian. When the Primarch arrived, he found only ruins. No towers, no temples, no monuments. Only ashes carried by the wind. For a long time, he said nothing. The warriors of the word-bearers watched their Primarch walk through the remains of his greatest achievement. Every step carried him through memories. Every handful of ash reminded him of what had been lost. This was not a conquered city. This was an execution. And deep inside, something began to break. The word-bearers gathered soon after. 100,000 warriors, standing in formation upon the grave of Monarchia. Their armor was covered in dust. their prayer scrolls stained with ash, their faith shaken, but not yet destroyed. Many expected answers. Many expected justice. Instead, they received something else. The sky above the valley suddenly turned gold. A wave of light swept across the horizon. Every warrior saw it. Every warrior felt it. A presence, ancient, vast, overwhelming. Then he appeared, the Emperor of mankind. Golden light surrounded him. Beside him stood the Custodes. Behind him stood Malthador. And nearby, watching in silence, stood Robute Guilliman, the architect of Monarchia's destruction. The valley fell silent. Lorgar stepped forward. For a moment, it seemed as though he might finally receive an explanation, an answer, an apology. Instead, the Emperor spoke a single command, a command that echoed through the minds of every warrior present, a command that struck with the force of a god. Plus kneel. Plus 100,000 Space Marines collapsed instantly. Lorgar collapsed with them. The word-bearers fell into the ashes of Monarchia, forced to kneel before the Father they worshipped, forced to kneel before the man they had dedicated their lives to serving. And as Lorgar struggled against the crushing psychic weight bearing down upon him, he realized this was not a lesson. It was a humiliation. And it was only beginning. 100,000 warriors knelt in the ashes of Monarchia. Not by choice, not out of loyalty, not out of devotion. They knelt because the Emperor commanded it. The psychic weight crushing down upon them was impossible to resist. Even Space Marines, even the word-bearers, even a Primarch. Lorgar fought against it. For a moment he tried to stand, tried to look his father in the eye, tried to understand why. The effort was useless. The Emperor's will was absolute. The Primarch collapsed back into the dust. His hands sank into the ashes of the city he had built, the city he had loved, the city his father had destroyed. Then the Emperor finally spoke, not with anger, not with hatred, with disappointment. That hurt far more. For decades, the word-bearers had carried the imperial truth across the galaxy, or so they believed. But according to the Emperor, they had failed. While other legions conquered hundreds of worlds, the word-bearers moved slowly. They built temples, raised monuments, converted populations. They spread faith. The Emperor had never wanted faith. He wanted unity, compliance, progress, reason. To him, Monarchia was not an achievement. It was evidence of failure. You are not a priest, Lorgar. The words struck harder than any weapon. You are a general. Silence filled the valley. Every word-bearer heard it. Every word-bearer remembered it. Lorgar stared at the ground. The Emperor continued. Humanity did not need gods. It did not need religion. It did not need worship. It needed enlightenment. The Imperium was being built through reason, not faith, and the word-bearers had forgotten that. Monarchia had been their punishment, a lesson, a warning, nothing more. When the speech ended, nobody spoke. Not Malkador, not Gilliman, not even Lorgar. The Emperor turned and left. The golden light faded. The custodes departed with him. And just like that, the master of mankind was gone, leaving only silence behind. Lorgar remained where he was, still kneeling, still staring at the ashes. For a long time, nobody approached him. Then a sound broke the silence. Sobbing. At first, Argel Tal thought it came from one of the refugees. Then he realized the truth. It was Lorgar, the Primarch of the Word-bearers, the son of the Emperor, crying in the ruins of Monarchia. Argel Tal would remember that moment for the rest of his life, not because his Primarch looked weak, because he looked broken. The faith that had guided him since childhood had been shattered in a single afternoon. The Emperor had not merely destroyed a city, he had destroyed belief itself. Eventually, Argel Tal and Chaplain Zaphin approached him. Together, they helped their Primarch stand. Neither man knew what to say. There were no words for this. No prayer, no scripture, no lesson. Only grief. Meanwhile, far from the valley, another survivor struggled through the aftermath. Cyrene Valantian could no longer see. The light that had destroyed Monarchia had taken her sight forever. Yet despite the pain, despite the loss, something strange had happened. Her faith had not died. If anything, it had become stronger, because now she knew the truth. Only a god could have done what she had witnessed. Only a god could destroy an entire city with a single command. The Emperor was real, and he hated them. When Argel Tal eventually found her among the survivors, she was weak, blind, and barely alive. He carried her aboard the Word-bearer's flagship himself, not as a prisoner, not as a refugee, as a symbol, a living reminder of what had happened at Monarchia. In time, the Legion would give her a new name, the Blessed Lady. But that would come later. For now, the Word-bearers had returned to their fleet, and a terrible silence had settled over the Legion. The prayers stopped. The sermons stopped. The faith remained, but it no longer knew where to look. And somewhere deep within that silence, something dark was beginning to listen. After Monarchia, the Word-bearers changed. Not overnight, not openly, but everyone felt it. The prayers became less frequent, the sermons became quieter. The certainty that had once defined the Legion slowly began to fade. For years, the Word-bearers had believed they understood their place in the galaxy. Now, they understood nothing. The Emperor had rejected their faith. Their greatest achievement had been erased, and their Primarch had withdrawn from the world. Back on Colchis, Lorgar locked himself away. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Nobody was allowed inside. Nobody knew what he was doing. The Great Crusade continued without him. Worlds were conquered, empires fell. The Imperium marched onward. But the Primarch of the Word-Bearers remained hidden within the ancient temples of his homeworld, alone, searching for answers. Lorgar reread every sacred text he had ever written, every prayer, every sermon, every chapter of the Book of Lorgar. The same question haunted him every day. If the Emperor was not a god, then what was he? And if humanity did not need faith, why did faith come so naturally to humanity? The more he searched, the less sense the galaxy seemed to make. That was when two familiar figures stepped forward, Kor Phaeron and Erebus. No men in the Legion understood Lorgar better, or knew how to manipulate him more effectively. Neither tried to comfort him. Neither told him to forget Monarchia. Instead, they asked a simple question. What if the Emperor was wrong? At first, the idea felt impossible. The Emperor was the greatest being humanity had ever known, the master of Terra, the creator of the Primarchs. How could he be wrong? Yet the question remained. If faith was meaningless, why had civilizations worshipped gods for thousands of years? If religion was merely superstition, why did it appear on world after world across the galaxy? Why did humanity always seem drawn towards something greater than itself? Kor Phaeron spoke of old Colchissian beliefs, ancient stories, forgotten gods, truths buried beneath centuries of imperial doctrine. Erebus took the idea even further. He argued that perhaps Lorgar's mistake had never been faith itself. Perhaps he had simply placed his faith in the wrong god. The thought was dangerous, heretical, and impossible to ignore. For the first time since Monarchia, Lorgar felt something stir within him. Not certainty, not yet, but purpose. If the Emperor was not divine, then perhaps there were other powers in the universe worthy of worship. Real powers, ancient powers, gods. The search began almost immediately. The Word-Bearers returned to the stars. Officially, they continued serving the Imperium. Officially, they remained loyal. Unofficially, everything had changed. Every conquered world became an investigation. Every temple became a clue. Every forgotten religion became evidence. The Legion was no longer searching for compliance. It was searching for truth. And somewhere on Terra, the Emperor noticed. He no longer trusted Lorgar. Not after Monarchia. Not after the silence. Not after the questions. So he sent observers, the Custodes. Among them were two warriors already familiar to the Legion, Vendatha and Aquilin. Their mission was simple: watch, listen, report. The Emperor's eyes would remain fixed upon the Word-Bearers. Every action, every conversation, every secret. Nothing was supposed to escape their notice. To the Custodes, it was a duty. To the Word-Bearers, it was an insult. And to Erebus, it was a problem that would eventually need a permanent solution. Because the search was leading somewhere, toward a place whispered about in ancient myths, a place where the boundary between reality and something far older had grown thin. A world at the edge of the known galaxy. A world called Cadia. Cadia did not look like a holy world. It looked cursed. Even from orbit, something felt wrong. The skies carried an unnatural violet glow. The landscape was harsh and barren, and hanging above the planet was a sight that made even space marines uneasy. The Eye of Terror, a wound in reality itself. A storm where the laws of nature no longer applied. Most Imperial commanders would have avoided such a place. Lorgar moved toward it. Because for the first time since Monarchia, he believed he was getting closer to an answer. The word-bearers descended onto the world. What they found there made even less sense. The tribes of Cadia lived primitive lives. They wore human skin as cloaks. Their eyes glowed purple. Ancient symbols covered their bodies, symbols that looked disturbingly familiar. Argel Tal recognized some of them immediately. They resembled the old runes of Kolchis, the same symbols Lorgar had studied since childhood. That should have been impossible. Cadia and Kolchis were separated by vast distances. Their civilizations had never met. Yet somehow they shared the same ancient language, the same myths, the same beliefs. The deeper the Legion investigated, the stranger everything became. The tribes welcomed them, not cautiously, not fearfully, as if they had been expecting them, as if they already knew who Lorgar was. At the center of it all stood a woman called Ingathel. She appeared old and fragile, wrapped in animal hides, surrounded by shamans and warriors. Yet there was something unsettling about her. She looked at Lorgar the way an old friend might look at someone they had been waiting years to meet. "You seek the truth," she said. Lorgar did not deny it. That was exactly why he had come. Ingathel claimed she knew the answers he had spent his entire life searching for. Not answers about the Imperium, not answers about the Emperor. Answers about the gods, the real gods. The words immediately drew attention. Then Datha stepped forward. The custodian had tolerated a great deal already. Monarchia, the Legion's growing obsession with religion, the endless search for forbidden knowledge. But this felt different, dangerous. He trusted Ingathel less with every passing hour. Argel Tal shared some of those concerns. The entire situation felt wrong. Yet every instinct telling him to leave was matched by another telling him to stay. Because if there was even a chance that answers existed here, they had to know. Days later, Ingathel led them beneath the surface of Cadia, deep into ancient caverns untouched by sunlight. The tunnels stretched for miles beneath the world, older than any human settlement, older than recorded history. The further they descended, the quieter everything became. Soon, the only sound was the distant flow of underground water and the echo of their own footsteps. Eventually, they reached a vast ritual chamber. Ancient symbols covered every surface. Torches burned with strange colors. The air itself felt heavy, as if something unseen was watching from the darkness. This was the place Ingathel had promised would reveal the truth. She turned toward Lorgar. Then she explained what the gods demanded. A sacrifice, not symbolic, not ceremonial. Real blood, real death. Human lives offered in exchange for revelation. The chamber fell silent. Even the word-bearers hesitated. Vendatha did not. The custodian immediately understood what was happening. This was not enlightenment. This was corruption. And he had no intention of allowing it to continue. As the first sacrifices were prepared, Vendatha stepped forward and raised his guardian spear. The golden warrior's voice thundered through the cavern. Enough! For the first time since arriving on Cadia, the Emperor's judgment had finally spoken. And before the day was over, blood would be spilled. Not by cultists, not by tribesmen, but by the Imperium itself. The cavern fell silent. Vendatha stood alone beneath the torchlight, guardian spear in hand, golden armor gleaming against the darkness. The custodian's gaze moved from Ingathel to Lorgar, then to the terrified prisoners gathered around the altar. This ends now. His voice echoed through the chamber. No one answered. The ritual fires crackled softly. The underground river continued its distant murmur. But every warrior present understood what was happening. The line had finally been crossed. For months, the word-bearers had searched for answers. For months, they had followed clues through forgotten temples and dead religions. Now that search had led them here, to blood sacrifice, to cult rituals, to something the Imperium would never tolerate. Vendatha leveled his spear. You stand on the edge of treason. The accusation hung in the air. No one denied it. Not Erebus, not Kor Phaeron, not even Lorgar. The custodian took another step forward. His eyes never left the Primarch. Return to Terra. Submit yourselves for judgment, or answer for your crimes. Argel Tal felt his stomach tighten, because deep down, part of him knew Vendatha was right. The sacrifices, the rituals, the promises of hidden gods. None of this belonged to the Imperium. None of this belonged to humanity. Yet if they walked away now, if they returned to Terra, then Monarchia meant nothing. The search meant nothing. Everything they had suffered would have been for nothing. Vendatha waited. Lorgar remained silent. The Primarch's eyes never left Ingathel, never left the altar, never left the promise of answers. And in that moment, Vendatha understood. Lorgar had already chosen. The custodian lowered his stance, preparing for violence. Argel Tal saw it happen, saw the realization cross Vendatha's face, saw the moment diplomacy died. Then everything happened at once. Vendatha moved. The guardian spear struck like lightning. A word-bearer died instantly. Then another. A third followed moments later. 3 Legion veterans, dead before they could even react. The cavern exploded into chaos. Bolters roared, warriors charged. Venditha cut through them all. Argel Tal had fought orcs, Xenos empires, warp creatures. Nothing had prepared him for a custodian unleashed. The Golden Warrior moved with terrifying speed. Bolter rounds shattered against his armor. Chain swords failed to reach in. Every strike killed. Every movement was perfect. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that one custodian might slaughter everyone in the chamber. Then Argel Tal saw an opening. A single heartbeat, a single mistake. He acted without thinking, without hesitation, without permission. His blade left his hand. The sword spun through the air. Venditha turned too late. The weapon punched through his mouth. The tip erupted from the back of his skull. Silence. The custodian staggered. His spear slipped from his hands. Then he fell. The sound echoed through the cavern like a monument collapsing. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Argel Tal stared in disbelief. Venditha was dead. A custodian of the Emperor. One of the Emperor's own companions. Killed by the very legion he had been sent to watch. There would be no forgiveness after this. No explanations. No return. The word-bearers had crossed a line they could never uncross. Blood from Venditha's corpse flowed across the altar. The final sacrifice. The 10th offering. Exactly what the ritual required. And suddenly the cavern began to shake. The flames burned violet. The darkness deepened. Something ancient stirred beneath reality itself. Ingethel smiled. The ritual was complete, and the truth Lorgar had spent his entire life searching for was finally about to reveal itself. The truth arrived wearing the face of a monster. The moment Venditha's blood touched the altar, the cavern changed. The air grew cold, the flames turned violet, and every warrior in the chamber felt the same thing. A presence, ancient, vast, watching. For years, Lorgar had searched for proof that faith mattered, proof that humanity's need for belief was not a flaw, proof that the universe held something greater than itself. Now, for the first time, he was about to receive an answer. The old woman called Ingethel began to rise. At first, Argel Tal thought it was a trick of the light. Then her body started to change. Bones cracked, skin split apart, limbs twisted into impossible shapes. The sound echoed through the cavern, wet, violent, wrong. Warriors instinctively reached for their weapons, others froze where they stood. No one had ever seen anything like this. The transformation continued. The old woman disappeared. Something else emerged in her place, something that had been hiding beneath human flesh all along. Massive wings unfolded, claws scraped across stone, eyes burned with unnatural light. A demon stood before them. The creature towered above the altar, monstrous, terrifying, and smiling. Argel Tal felt every instinct screaming at him to open fire. Everything he had learned during the Great Crusade told him this thing should be destroyed. Yet nobody attacked. Not Erebus, not Kor Phaeron, not even Lorgar. The Primarch simply stared, listening, waiting. The demon spoke. "You wished to know the truth." Its voice seemed to come from every corner of the cavern. Lorgar took a step forward. For the first time since Monarchia, he looked alive again. Not happy, not relieved, focused, as though every moment of pain had led him to this exact place. The creature introduced itself. Ingethel, no longer merely chosen, now ascended. The messenger had revealed its true form, and the message was simple. The Emperor had lied, not about the dangers of the warp, not about its existence, about its nature. According to Ingethel, the warp was not an empty dimension. It was inhabited. It was alive, and within it dwelled beings older than civilizations, older than empires, older than humanity itself. Gods, real gods, the very things Lorgar had spent his life searching for, the very things the Emperor had forbidden mankind from worshipping. The cavern remained silent. Every warrior listened. Argel Tal watched his Primarch carefully, expected doubt, expected resistance, expected anger. Instead, he saw something else. Hope. The same hope Monarchia had nearly destroyed, the same hope Lorgar had carried his entire life. For years he had searched for meaning. Now someone was offering it to him. Ingethel continued. The Emperor was not humanity's savior. He was a deceiver, a ruler who had hidden the truth, a ruler who feared the gods, a ruler who wanted humanity to worship only him. The accusations sounded impossible, yet after Monarchia, nothing felt impossible anymore. Lorgar listened to every word, and that frightened Argel Tal more than the demon itself, because he knew his Primarch. He knew the hunger inside him, the need to understand, the need to believe. And Ingethel was feeding that hunger, one answer at a time. Then the demon offered something greater, not proof, not stories. Evidence, a journey, a chance to witness the hidden history of the galaxy with his own eyes, to see the truth behind the Emperor, the Primarchs, humanity. Everything. The offer hung in the air. No one spoke. No one moved. The entire future of the Legion seemed balanced upon a single decision. Lorgar stared into the eyes of the demon. Then he nodded. And with that simple gesture, the pilgrimage truly began. Lorgar should have turned away. Every lesson of the Great Crusade demanded it. Every warning the Emperor had ever given. Every instinct of survival. He should have walked away from the demon. Instead, he accepted its offer. And with that decision, the fate of the word-bearers was sealed. Ingethel explained that the truth could not simply be told. It had to be experienced. The warp was too vast, too complex, too terrible. Words alone would never be enough. If Lorgar truly wanted answers, he would have to see them for himself. Argel Tal didn't trust the creature. Neither did many of the warriors standing beside him, but nobody challenged their Primarch. Not after Monarchia, not after Cadia, not after Vendatha. They had already come too far. Turning back no longer felt possible. The demon's instructions were simple. A select group would accompany it into the Eye of Terror. They would travel aboard the destroyer Orpheo's Lament. There, beyond the boundaries of reality, they would witness the truth hidden from humanity. Argel Tal volunteered immediately. So did the warriors of the 7th Company. 100 word-bearers, the Legion's most devoted sons, the Legion's strongest believers. None of them understood what they were about to endure. The Orpheo's Lament entered the storm soon after. The deeper the vessel traveled into the eye, the stranger everything became. Reality itself seemed unstable. Time behaved differently. Distances no longer made sense. The crew reported voices in empty corridors, moving shadows, impossible shapes lurking just beyond sight. Then came the final order. Deactivate the Geller field. The bridge fell silent. Every officer understood what that meant. The Geller field was the only thing protecting a ship from the horrors of the warp. Without it, reality itself would cease to exist inside the vessel. Even veteran space marines hesitated. Argel Tal hesitated. Only for a moment. Then the order was obeyed. The field collapsed, and hell entered the ship. The effect was immediate. Human crew members died within seconds. Some screamed, some laughed. Some simply exploded into clouds of blood and bone. Others transformed into things that had once been human. The corridors became slaughterhouses. The warp flooded every deck of the vessel, and there was nowhere to hide. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Food disappeared, water disappeared, hope disappeared. The survivors endured because Astartes were designed to endure. But even space marines have limits. Hunger became unbearable. The warriors consumed everything available. Then they consumed the dead. Human crew, servitors, anything that could keep them alive another day. Every sacrifice pushed them further from the men they had once been. And throughout it all, the voices never stopped. The whispers came from everywhere, from the walls, from the darkness, from their own thoughts. Argel Tal fought them at first. Then one of them began speaking back, not as a voice, as a presence, a creature hiding within the warp itself. Its name was Rom. And before the journey ended, Argel Tal would learn that surviving the Eye of Terror was never the purpose of this pilgrimage. The purpose was transformation, and the process had already begun. At first, Argel Tal believed he could resist it. He was a space marine, a veteran of the Great Crusade, a captain of the Word-Bearers. Whatever lurked inside the warp, he believed his will was stronger. The warp disagreed. The journey aboard the Orfeo's Lament continued. Days lost meaning. Weeks blurred together. Eventually, even time itself seemed unreliable. Sometimes Argel Tal felt as though he had slept for hours. Other times, entire days vanished without explanation. The warp was not merely surrounding them, it was changing them. The hunger never left. The whispers never stopped. And the presence called Rom remained close, watching, waiting, learning. At first, Argel Tal treated it like an enemy, a predator circling wounded prey. But the demon never attacked. Instead, it spoke. It asked questions, listened, observed. Slowly, against all reason, a relationship formed. Argel Tal learned about the warp. Rom learned about humanity. Neither trusted the other, yet neither could ignore the other. The boundary between them grew thinner every day. Then came the visions. The survivors found themselves witnessing moments that should have been impossible. Ancient terra, forgotten civilizations, the rise and fall of empires long erased from history. Argel Tal watched humanity's past unfold before him. Some of it felt real, some of it felt carefully chosen, but all of it served the same purpose: to make them question everything they thought they knew. The most disturbing vision came deep within the journey. The Primarch Project. Argel Tal saw the laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains, saw the gestation capsules, saw the 20 unborn sons of the Emperor. Then he witnessed the catastrophe, the scattering. The moment the Primarchs were cast across the galaxy. According to Imperial history, it had been an accident. According to the visions, it had been something else entirely. Something planned, something guided, something older than mankind. The implication was terrifying. The Primarchs had never escaped their fate. Their destinies had been shaped before they were even born. Every vision carried the same message. The Emperor had hidden the truth. Not because he didn't know it, because he feared it, because he wanted control, because he wanted humanity to remain blind. The message was seductive. Dangerously seductive, and after Monarchia, it was exactly what Lorgar needed to hear. The pilgrimage continued. More warriors died. Others changed. Bones shifted beneath armor. Voices spoke from empty rooms. Shadows moved where no shadows should exist. The survivors were becoming something new, something unnatural. Argel Tal felt it happening inside himself. The change was slow at first, then impossible to ignore. Rom was no longer beside him. Rom was within him. Their thoughts overlapped, their emotions merged. Their strengths became one. The transformation terrified him, yet part of him welcomed it, because every step deeper into the warp brought him closer to certainty, closer to purpose, closer to the answers he had followed across the galaxy. By the end of the journey, only 38 warriors remained alive. 38 survivors from the 100 who had entered the storm. The rest were dead, consumed, or transformed beyond recognition. And those 38 warriors were no longer ordinary Astartes. They carried something inside them, something ancient, something hungry, something that had become part of their very souls. When the Orfeo's lament finally emerged from the Eye of Terror, the survivors expected years to have passed. Instead, they discovered the impossible. To them, 7 months had gone by. 7 months of suffering. 7 months of visions. 7 months inside hell itself. But in real space, only a single minute had passed. And waiting for them was a galaxy that had no idea what they had become. The first of the Gal Vorbak, the Blessed Sons. The first true warriors of chaos. And their return would change the fate of the word-bearers forever. When the Gal Vorbak returned, nobody understood what they were looking at. Not at first. They still wore the armor of the word-bearers. They still spoke with familiar voices. They still knelt before Lorgar. But something had changed. Something fundamental. Argel Tal felt it every second. Ram was always there, watching through his eyes, listening through his ears, sharing every thought. The demon was no longer a visitor. It was part of him, part of all 38 survivors. Lorgar listened carefully as they described everything they had witnessed. The visions, the gods, the warp, the hidden history of humanity. The Primarch sat in silence for a long time. Then he accepted it. The search was over. The answer had been found. The Emperor was not a god. The gods were real. And humanity had been living in ignorance. To Lorgar, it all finally made sense. Monarchia, the Emperor's anger, the Imperial truth, everything. The universe had meaning after all. It simply wasn't the meaning he had expected. The word-bearers changed again. This time there was no uncertainty, no hesitation, no doubt. The old faith had died on Monarchia. A new faith was taking its place. And unlike the old one, this faith would be hidden. For now. The Legion continued serving the Imperium, continued fighting its wars, continued smiling when watched. But beneath the surface, everything was different. The Book of Lorgar was rewritten. Chaplains spread new teachings. Secret lodges multiplied throughout the Legion. And at the center of it all stood Erebus, patient, careful, always planning. While Lorgar searched for truth, Erebus searched for opportunity. He saw something the others did not. The gods did not merely want followers. They wanted champions. And there was one champion whose fall would change the entire galaxy. Horus. War Master Horus Lupercal, the Emperor's favored son, the greatest Primarch, the commander of the Great Crusade. If Horus could be turned, everything else would follow. Meanwhile, another problem remained: Aquilon. Unlike Vendatha, the custodian was still alive, still watching, still reporting. He knew something had happened on Cadia. He knew the Legion was hiding something, but he lacked proof, and the word-bearers intended to keep it that way. Lorgar ordered the destruction of every trace left behind. The tribes of Cadia disappeared. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence disappeared. The truth was buried beneath blood and silence. Officially, nothing had happened. Officially, the word-bearers remained loyal servants of the Imperium. The lie worked. For a time. But not forever. Because the galaxy was already changing. The War Master was drifting toward rebellion. The legions were beginning to fracture. Ancient loyalties were weakening. And beneath it all, the gods were moving their pieces into place. Lorgar had found his truth. The Gal Vorbak had been born. The first heretic had taken his first steps into darkness. Now it was time for the rest of the galaxy to follow. And soon, on a dead world called Istvan V, brother would turn against brother. The Horus Heresy was about to begin. The Horus Heresy did not begin with a battle. It began with a choice made by Horus, a choice encouraged by Erebus, a choice that would eventually drag half the Imperium into civil war. By the time the War Master openly rebelled, the word-bearers were ready. They had found their gods. They had found their purpose. Now they finally had a war. When the summons came for Istvan V, most of the Imperium believed it was a rescue mission. Loyal legions rushed to support Horus, the Salamanders, the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard. Thousands of ships translated from the warp, millions of warriors prepared for battle. They believed they were marching toward victory. Instead, they were marching into an execution. The first wave landed and immediately engaged the traitor forces. The fighting was brutal, but manageable. Everything appeared to be proceeding according to plan. Then the second wave arrived, the reinforcements. The warriors who had supposedly come to help. The Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, the Alpha Legion, the Word-Bearers. For a brief moment, the Loyalists believed salvation had arrived. Then the guns turned. Bolters opened fire. Artillery changed targets. Entire formations disappeared beneath storms of shells and plasma. The betrayal was complete. The drop site massacre had begun. Across the black sands of Istvan V, brother killed brother. Space Marines who had fought side by side for decades suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of the battlefield. The scale of the slaughter was unimaginable. Thousands died before they even understood what was happening. The sky burned with falling aircraft. Explosions shook the horizon. The Great Crusade died in blood. Argel Tal watched it unfold from the front lines. Even after Cadia, even after the pilgrimage, Even after everything he had witnessed, part of him still felt disturbed. Because this was no longer philosophy, no longer faith, no longer hidden truths. This was betrayal. Real, permanent, unforgivable. And there was no going back. Somewhere within the chaos, another battle was unfolding, a far more personal one. Corvus Corax, the Primarch of the Raven Guard, the Emperor's son, the Master of Shadows. Corax had never liked Lorgar, even before the heresy, even before Monarchia. He saw weakness where others saw devotion. He saw excuses where others saw faith. And now, at last, he saw what Lorgar had become. The Raven Lord's fury was terrifying. He tore through traitor ranks like a living weapon. Word-bearers died by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Nothing slowed him. Nothing stopped him. Eventually, his path led to Lorgar. For a brief moment, the two Primarchs stared at one another across the battlefield. One represented faith, the other represented judgment. Then Corax attacked. The speed was shocking, the violence even worse. Lorgar barely managed to react. The first blow nearly killed him. The second shattered his guard. The third sent him stumbling backward. For years, Lorgar had convinced himself that enlightenment had made him stronger, that understanding the gods had elevated him. Corax immediately proved otherwise. Because Corax had not come to lecture him. He had not come to humiliate him. He had come to kill him. And for the first time since Monarchia, Lorgar realized he might actually succeed. Corax hit him like a storm. There was no speech, no challenge, no warning. One moment, the Raven Lord was across the battlefield. The next, he was tearing through Lorgar's defenses. The Primarch of the Word-bearers barely managed to raise a Luminarum in time. The impact nearly ripped the weapon from his hands. Corax attacked again, and again, and again. Every strike carried the fury of a betrayed brother. Every blow reminded Lorgar of a truth he had spent years avoiding. He was not a warrior. Not like Corax, not like Russ, not like Angron. He had always been something else. A thinker, a philosopher, a preacher. And on Istvan V, that difference nearly got him killed. The Raven Lord's claws ripped through armor. Ceramite shattered. Blood splashed across the black sands. Lorgar staggered backward. For years he had searched for gods. Now he was simply fighting to survive. Corax showed no mercy. Why would he? Thousands of Raven Guard were dying around him. The Imperium was tearing itself apart, and standing at the center of it all was the brother who had helped make it happen. You always hid behind faith. The words struck almost as hard as the claws. Corax attacked again. You always needed something to believe in. Another blow. Another step backward. You were always weak. For a moment, Lorgar saw the future. Not a vision, not prophecy. Reality. He was going to die here, on the black sands of Istvan V, killed by his own brother. Then another Primarch entered the battle, Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, the terror of Nostramo. Kurz crashed into Korax with enough force to shake the ground beneath them. The two Primarchs vanished into a whirlwind of claws and violence. Suddenly, Lorgar could breathe again. Suddenly, death was looking somewhere else. For a long moment, he simply watched, because he knew the truth. Without Kurz, he would already be dead. The gods had not saved him. His faith had not saved him. Another monster had. Meanwhile, far above Istvan V, another tragedy was unfolding. One that mattered far more to Argel Tal, the Blessed Lady, Cyrene Valantion, the last living survivor of Monarchia. The woman the Legion had carried from the ashes, the woman who reminded them of everything they had lost. To many word-bearers, she was a symbol. To Argel Tal, she was something more. She remembered who he had been before Cadia, before Rom, before the warp, before the darkness. Whenever he spoke with her, part of him could almost believe that the old Argel Tal still existed. That illusion was about to die, because Aquilin had finally learned the truth. The custodian had spent years watching the word-bearers, years gathering pieces, years trying to understand what had happened on Cadia. Now he knew. The Legion had fallen, and in Aquilin's eyes there could be no forgiveness for that, no compromise, no redemption, only judgment. Cyrene never saw him coming. She heard armored footsteps, a voice, then silence. To Aquilin, she was not an innocent woman. She was a symbol of the corruption spreading through the Legion, a relic of Monarchia, a reminder of everything the word-bearers had become. And so the custodian acted, just as Vendatha would have acted, just as the Emperor expected him to act. When news of her death reached Argel Tal, something inside him broke. Not his faith, not his loyalty, the last piece of his humanity. And before Istvan V was over, Aquilin would learn exactly what the Gal Vorbak had become.
By the time Argel Tal found Aquilin, the battle for Istvan V was already over. The killing continued. The fires still burned. But the battle inside him had ended. Cyrene was dead. The last survivor of Monarchia. The last reminder of the man he used to be. Gone. For years, she had been a symbol of everything the Legion had lost. A living memory of faith before Cadia, before the gods, before the lies. Now she was gone, and all that remained was grief. Aquilin waited. The custodian knew someone would come. He knew the word-bearers would demand blood. What he did not know was how much Argel Tal had changed. The two warriors faced one another in silence. Neither needed an explanation. Neither needed an apology. Cyrene stood between them like a ghost. Aquilin had acted out of duty. Argel Tal understood that. That was the cruelest part, because once upon a time, he might have done the same. Before Monarchia, before Cadia, before Rom, before the darkness. Then they charged. The collision shook the deck beneath them. Aquilin struck first. His guardian spear moved with terrifying precision. Every attack was perfect, every movement disciplined, every strike lethal. The custodian fought exactly as the Emperor had intended. Argel Tal fought like something else, something new, something neither fully human nor fully demonic. Aquilin wounded him, again and again. Yet each injury only seemed to make the Gal Vorbak stronger. Rom could feel the grief, the rage, the hatred. And unlike Argel Tal, the demon had no interest in restraint. The barrier between them finally collapsed. For years, Argel Tal had resisted. For years, he had tried to remain himself. Now he stopped fighting. He gave Rom everything. The pain, the sorrow, the loss. The demon accepted it all. The transformation was immediate. Armor split apart, shadows twisted around flesh, warp fire burned beneath ceramite. The creature standing before Aquilin was no longer merely Argel Tal. It was something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. The Gal Vorbak unleashed. For the first time, Aquilin hesitated. Only for a second, but a second was enough. The battle ended quickly after that. The custodian wounded the monster. The monster shattered the custodian. Gold armor broke, bone broke, and at last Aquilin fell. Silence followed. Argel Tal stood over the corpse, victorious. Yet there was no satisfaction, no relief, no peace, because vengeance had changed nothing. Cyrene was still dead. Monarchia was still gone. The man she had once known no longer existed. As the fires of Istvan V burned across the horizon, Argel Tal finally understood what Cadia had truly done to him. The gods had never wanted his worship. They wanted his soul. And they had taken it. Elsewhere, Lorgar watched the heresy unfold. The galaxy was burning exactly as the gods had promised. Brother fought brother. Legions shattered. Worlds died. The age of darkness had begun. And at the center of it all stood a Primarch who had spent his entire life searching for meaning. That was the tragedy of Lorgar Aurelian. He never sought power. He never sought conquest. He never sought war. He sought truth. And in the end, he found it. The problem was that truth came with a price. Monarchia, Cadia, Istvan V. Each step had felt justified. Each choice had seemed necessary, until there was nothing left but ruin. History would remember Lorgar as the first heretic, the first son to turn away from the Emperor, the first son to embrace chaos. But perhaps that title misses the real tragedy. Lorgar was never searching for darkness. He was searching for purpose. The darkness simply answered first. And because it did, the galaxy would burn for the next 10,000 years. The first heretic was over. The Horus Heresy had only just begun. Next came Calth. Next came Ultramar. And next came a war that would consume the Imperium itself.